one of the most iconic fictional villains in American history was not invented. He was met, in person, by the author who created him. And the real man was somehow more unsettling than anything that ever appeared on screen. His name was Alfredo Ballí Treviño, a doctor, a surgeon, educated, articulate, and charming in the way that certain dangerous people are charming, not despite what they are, but because of it. Thomas Harris, the author who would go on to create Hannibal Lecter, met Ballí Treviño in 1963 while working as a young journalist in Mexico. Harris had been granted access to interview a prisoner on death row, a man convicted of murder awaiting execution. That prisoner was Ballí Treviño. Harris sat across from him in a prison interview room, and later said the experience never left him. What Harris found was not what he expected. Ballí Treviño was not visibly monstrous. He was composed, educated. He spoke thoughtfully about medicine, about psychology, about human nature. He was curious about Harris in return. The kind of focused, intelligent curiosity that most people find flattering until they realize it has nothing warm behind it. Harris described him as a man who seemed to observe people the way a scientist observes a specimen, not with cruelty, with interest. That distinction is what made him frightening. The crime that put Ballí Treviño on death row was the murder of a young man named Jesus Castillo Morales. Ballí Treviño had lured him under the pretense of offering work. What followed was a killing that investigators described as methodical rather than frenzied, which told them something significant about the man who committed it. This was not someone who lost control. This was someone who made decisions. The disposal of the body showed careful thinking, planning. The kind of behavior that suggested this level of composure was not new. And when investigators looked deeper into Ballí Treviño's past, they found a pattern of associations with young men who had subsequently disappeared. None of those cases were ever fully resolved. How many people Alfredo Ballí Treviño actually killed? Nobody knows for certain. His death sentence was eventually commuted. He served time, was released, and lived quietly for years afterward, working, in some capacity, in medicine. The idea of that fact alone, that the man who inspired Hannibal Lecter returned to a medical context after conviction, is something investigators and true crime researchers have returned to repeatedly without comfortable resolution. Thomas Harris never spoke extensively about the interview in public for decades. When he did eventually confirm the connection, he described Ballí Treviño not as a monster in the way fiction renders monsters, loud, theatrical, consuming, but as something quieter and harder to process. A man who was entirely present, entirely controlled, and entirely absent of whatever it is that makes most people hesitate. What Harris took from that room and eventually put on the page was not a direct portrait. Hannibal Lecter is fictional. The details diverge significantly. The cultured European background, the specific crimes, the FBI context, all invention. But the core of what Harris captured, the intelligence weaponized as charm, the clinical detachment behind social fluency, the sense of a person who sees other human beings as objects of study rather than a feeling. That came from one real interview room, one real man, one real hour that a young journalist never fully left behind. Alfredo Ballí Treviño died in 2009. He had outlived his death sentence by decades, had outlived the assumption that people who do what he did cannot exist in ordinary life, had outlived, in some ways, the comfort of believing that evil announces itself. Thomas Harris went on to write one of the best-selling thriller series in American publishing history. The character born from that 1963 prison interview became one of the most recognizable villains in cinema. And the real man, the quiet, charming, composed real man, spent his final years in relative obscurity. Nobody outside his immediate world knew what they were sitting next to. That was always the point. That was always the thing Thomas Harris understood from that room and never stopped writing about. The most dangerous people in any room are the ones who make you feel completely comfortable.